People said I was drunk, lonely, or losing my mind, but I'm not. I spoke to her, a creature, a female Bigfoot, and she spoke back. One word at first, then more. You're probably thinking, what the hell is she talking about? I can already smell your doubt. You think Bigfoot isn't real, and if it was, it sure wouldn't talk. Don't believe me? That's fine. Parrots speak like humans, right? So why can't something that's been watching us for years learn a few words too? I'm going to tell you exactly what happened to me, but I'm sorry, I can't tell you where I live because I still live there, and that creature still comes to see me. And I can't put her, or I should say, my friend, in danger, because we humans, we're crazy. After it happened, people tried to gaslight me, my own family, a ranger, even 2 men who came asking questions. This isn't a story. It's what happened. I'll tell you everything, just as it happened. Then you decide what's real. It was late October, western Maine. You can ask anybody from around here what the woods are like then. The leaves are mostly down. The cold gets under your clothes by mid-afternoon, and by supper it's dark like a cupboard door. I live a ways out. I won't say how far or where exactly. I can't. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm trying to keep something safe. All I'll say is there's a creek on one side of my place and a stand of spruce on the other. And if you stand on my porch at dawn, you can hear loons and sometimes coyotes. That's enough to set the picture. I'm a widow, 73. My husband's been gone 18 years. I used to be a nurse's aide at the clinic in town. Stopped a while back when my knees started to go and my eyes didn't like night driving. I keep busy, quilts mostly, simple ones. I stitch slow and straight. I dry herbs and make salves that people buy when they pass through, and my best friend Ruth puts them online for me. I don't spend much. Wood, groceries, a little gas when Ruth drives me. I'm not helpless. I want to say that up front. I have 2 sons. They don't come around much. We had words last year. I won't rehash it all, but they said I was a burden. Too many doctor visits, too much worry. They're not cruel boys. They're worn out with their own lives. That's what I tell myself. One lives down by Portland. The other moves around for work that never quite sticks. Nobody came right out and said, you're on your own, but that's how it felt. There's a particular quiet after your own family leaves you standing in your kitchen with your hands hanging there, and the only sound is the clock. I think that quiet has a weight to it. Ruth is my person. She's 70 and 5 miles down the road and always laughing at something. She runs the internet part of my life. She brings groceries, takes my quilts into town when I have a stack. She calls me sister, and we mean it the same way. There's also a younger man, Daniel. He's in his 30s and has money from his parents who died when he was young. He spends part of the year up here because the city makes him clench his jaw. He found me years ago when I sold him a quilt that reminded him of his mother. He calls me ma'am, and sometimes he slips and says, Mom, and I pretend I didn't hear it because I don't want him to be embarrassed. He brings me salt licks for the deer and pays too much for my herbal stuff. He says it helps him to help me. I let him. That week in October, the cold was getting sharp. I'd stacked most of my wood, but not all, and I was out there in the late afternoon dragging rounds from the pile and putting them by the back door. I was thinking about my husband when he was young, swinging a maul like the thing owed him money. I smiled at the memory, and then my foot hit a split log wrong and I went down. It was that fast. 1 second I was balancing the way I've done 1,000 times, and the next I felt something in my ankle pop, like a knuckle, only meaner. I sat up slow, and the pain went right up my leg. Not the kind that fades, the steady kind. I told myself it was a sprain. I said it out loud. You sprained it, Evelyn. Saying it out loud made it sound true. I tried to stand. I made it halfway before my knee buckled, and I had to sit again. I could feel my heartbeat in the joint. I don't have a cell tower out there. If you want to talk to someone, you walk or you wait. I knew Ruth would be by on Sunday. It was Friday. I thought about Daniel. He was out of town that week. I told myself I didn't need anybody. I pulled myself over to the bench by the woodpile and propped my ankle on a round and breathed slow, the way the physical therapist taught me after I fell 2 winters ago. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The woods were quiet. Not dead quiet. Just the kind where you can pick out each sound. Chickadees, the creek, wind in the tall spruces. Then something shifted at the tree line. Not a branch, a shape. Dark, upright. We get bears. I've had them at the trash. But this didn't move like a bear. Bears don't stop and straighten and look at you the way a man does when he's trying to decide what he's seeing. This being stepped between two spruce, and I saw the outline clean, tall, wide through the shoulders, arms too long. I remember my hands going hot and then cold. My mouth went dry. And the stupidest thought ran through my head. I didn't bring the air horn. It walked toward me. Not fast, not slow either. 10 steps, maybe 12, down the edge of the yard. The light was behind it, so I couldn't see much of the face, just the shine where its eyes would be and the way the hair lifted a little in the breeze. I could smell something like wet stone and leaves that had been under snow. I told myself to get up. My body did not listen. It stopped a few paces off. I could hear my own breath and the small ticking noises wood makes when it cools. It tilted its head like a dog trying to hear a whistle. I felt foolish and old and stubborn and stupid all at once. Then it said a word. Hurt. I don't think I breathed for a full count of 5. My brain tried to jam too many things through one door. I looked for a speaker or a person behind it. There wasn't anybody else there. The voice didn't sound like a person anyway. It was deep, like it started in the ground. The word wasn't smooth. It was careful, like something rolling around a stone to knock the edges off. I said, yes. I don't know why I whispered. I said, my ankle, and touched it like that would make the point. It watched my hand. It blinked. Not fast, thoughtful. It nodded once, not a big nod, just enough for me to see it. And then it turned and walked back into the trees and was gone, the way an owl is just gone when you look down and look back up. I sat like that for a long time. I could feel the bench under me and I could feel the cold creeping up through my coat, and none of it seemed real. I tried to stand again, and the pain told me to stop. I scooted to the door and got inside and wrapped my ankle with one of those elastic bandages and found my old cane. I made tea and burned the first cup because I forgot I'd put the kettle on. That night, I slept in short pieces. Every time I dropped off, I snapped awake thinking I heard something on the porch. Around 2 in the morning, I really did. A step, then another. Not a person's light step, a heavy one. I lay still and listened. Something brushed the siding near the window. The smell came through the cracks, that wet stone and leaf smell. No pounding, no door handle, just a presence. It stayed a minute, maybe 2, then the steps went away into snow-crest leaves. In the morning, I opened the door, and there was a bundle on the stoop. I almost missed it because it was tucked up against the wall like somebody had been careful not to have it seen from the yard. Stems wrapped in grass. Green stuff I knew, and some I didn't. Yarrow. Plantain. A piece of spruce tip, sticky and sharp-smelling. I've used those before for salves. My grandmother did too. The bundle had a small, smooth stone tied into it. That made no sense, and all the sense in the world. Weight holds things down. That's what I thought. I don't know why. I made a pot of tea and put my ankle up and just looked at the bundle. Thank you isn't something you yell into trees, not out here. It's something you say with your hands. I brewed the herbs I recognized and set the rest to dry. I left apples on the stump by the porch. I told myself raccoons would get them. I told myself a lot of things. Ruth came Sunday. She saw the cane and the bandage and fussed like a sister does. I said it was a twist. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the rest. She brought eggs and a newspaper and the kind of gossip that keeps your heart soft. When she left, she stood on the porch a long second and looked at the tree line. Sometimes this place feels like a church, she said. You ever get that? I said I did. We hugged. Her truck took the quiet with it when it went. 3 mornings later, I was on the porch with my coffee and I said, good morning, to the trees because that felt less foolish than saying it to nothing. Mist was moving slow across the yard. The sun was weak. The shape came out of the spruce and stood where the grass ends. I didn't feel the same kind of terror. Not the way I had that first day. It was more like the feeling when you're holding somebody's baby and you're scared to drop them even though you know you won't. I lifted my hand. It did not lift anything back. It watched. I said, thank you, and held up the empty grass tie like a student showing work to a teacher. The head did that small tilt again. Then the same voice, a little clearer this time, said, better? I nodded and said, A little. It stood another minute, then stepped backward into the trees and thinned out into the trunks. Things went like that for a while. It didn't come every day. Sometimes I went a week with nothing but the feeling you get when you know someone has walked your path and you can't prove it. Apples disappeared. Once it was fish. 3 little brook trout laid out like a picture from an old book, tails neat, eyes bright. I cooked them and felt strange eating a gift I didn't understand. I put out sugar the next day. Not much. Just a handful in a tin. It was gone by morning. The tin was upside down, washed by the rain. I put the tin away after that. I didn't want to teach bad habits. I talked more. Cold tonight. Snow tomorrow. Thank you for the herbs. Little things. It would answer sometimes. Cold. Snow. You. That last one made me think too hard, so I let it sit. I started hearing a smaller sound too. Like a lighter foot moving after the heavier one. I didn't see it for a long time. I'd catch a flash between trunks. A small shadow close to the big one's legs. One dawn I heard a noise like a child's breathy laugh. I stood very still. The big one made a low sound I felt in my ribs, and the little sound quit. My hands shook all of a sudden. I went inside and sat on the edge of the bed like I'd run up a hill. Daniel came up from the city around Thanksgiving. He brought too many groceries and a stack of mail, and that nervous energy big-hearted people carry when they think something might be wrong. He saw the cane and asked if I'd fallen. I said I had. He said, "We need to get you a better light by the woodpile." He spent an afternoon installing one. I smiled and let him. It faces down and it's not too bright. He told me about a trip he'd taken. I listened. He said, "You look good," and then, softer, "You look peaceful." I said I felt okay. That night we ate stew and I walked out to the porch and said softly, "Friend coming. Hide." I didn't know if it would understand. I didn't even know if it was listening. Nothing came to the yard that night. The next morning, while Daniel was at the truck loading the returns I'd sewn for him, I saw a shape between the trees, far back, watching, keeping distance. I lifted my hand an inch and lowered it. It stayed until the truck taillights went away. Then it stepped closer than it had before and said, "Young man, worry." I laughed once, the way you do when something true and sad lands right on its mark. "Yes," I said, "he does." It took one step, big footfall, slow, and said, "Watch. Keep safe." Those were the most words I'd heard. I had to sit. My knees got loose. Ruth saw something too, but she won't talk about it much. She came by on a Sunday in early December with bread she baked and the good jam. We sat and drank tea in our heavy sweaters. She was halfway through her story about someone's brother when she went quiet and tilted her head like she'd heard a whistle. Then she leaned a little and looked through the side window toward the trees. She said, careful and plain, "Evelyn, there's someone standing at your edge." The way she said it told me she knew it wasn't a someone like a man. I squeezed her hand and said, "Don't turn your head. Just breathe." We didn't speak for maybe a minute. Then the feeling changed, the way the room changes when a person leaves it, and she let out air she'd been holding. She didn't ask me to explain. She said, "All right," and patted my knuckles like I was the one who needed calming. When she left, she put her palm flat on the door frame and whispered something I didn't catch. January was mean that year. The kind of cold that rings when you walk in it. I kept the path to the shed, and I salted the steps. There were nights the wind pushed on the cabin like a big man leaning on a screen door. I pulled blankets to the porch and left them folded in the old metal trunk out there. I don't know why I did that. It just felt right, like setting water out for a stray cat you might never see. Some mornings the lid was closed and the blankets looked the same. Some mornings they were folded different. The snow around the trunk told stories I didn't repeat. Hunters came through once. 2 of them. Orange hats, rifles slung, talking too loud for the woods. They cut across a corner of my place that isn't really mine, but I tuck it into my chores anyway. They were looking for sign. One of them pointed at the ground and laughed like he'd made a joke. I walked out there with my cane like somebody's grandmother and told them they were on a woman's yard, and it was not a good idea to keep on. I said there were coyotes denning low, and the creek ice was thin, and I'd hate to fish a fool out of it. They were polite enough. They tipped their hats, said sorry, and turned around. I stood a long time pretending to watch them go. After they were gone, the big one came out from somewhere close. It stepped near enough for me to see frost on the hair at the chest and said one word. Danger. I nodded hard. Yes. It reached a hand toward me, not to touch, just to measure. Then it walked me back to the porch like a son would, stopping when I stopped, making sure my feet were steady. I started sleeping better. Not because I wasn't scared anymore. I was. But it was a different kind of scared. It wasn't panic. It was like standing in a church by yourself. You're not terrified. You're careful. You mind where you put your hands. You don't speak unless you need to. That's how the yard felt. The little one showed itself in February. Snow up to my calves and the sky white as paper. I'd come out to spread seed for the birds, and I slipped a little on the steps and said a bad word into the cold. I heard this sound, like someone trying not to laugh. I turned my head slow, and there it was, peeking around the big leg, smaller by half, the hair a shade lighter, the eyes the same, wide, bright, curious, but already learning caution. It looked at me the way a kid looks at a dog they want to pet but know they shouldn't. I lifted the bag of seed, showed it, and poured a line on the top step. The chickadees came like they were on a string. The little one leaned out too far, and the big one made that low chest note again, and the little one pulled back. They stayed a long minute, then gone. There were words after that. Not many, not smooth, but enough. Cold, better, fish, safe, friend. That last one made me cry in the dumb way old women cry when their insides get touched. It said, friend, one night when the moon was up and the snow had that blue shine. I said, yes, and it nodded like a man sealing a deal. You'll want me to describe it like a thing in a book. I won't. I'll tell you how it moved, how it behaved, what it did with its hands. The rest isn't for me to pin down. It used its fingers like tools. It could lift the log one-handed but also pick a stem without breaking it. It didn't stomp like people think. It stepped careful, like it respected the ground. It didn't smell like garbage. It smelled like creek banks and wet bark. Its eyes weren't animal eyes. They were old in a way I can't explain that doesn't sound foolish. It watched the way people who have lost too much watch, alert but not jumpy, soft until it needed to be iron. One afternoon in March, it brought me to the edge of the spruce where there's a fallen birch I'd stopped noticing. It pointed one finger at a shelf of mushrooms and then at the soft rot where the bark had peeled. It said, life. Not like a preacher, like a nurse pointing out a heartbeat on a monitor. I stood there with my cane and nodded like I understood more than I did. I thought about my husband and how the ground took him and how the ground makes room for everything else because of what it takes. Spring made me feel young and old the same minute. My ankle healed up enough for me to walk longer loops. It taught me things without speaking. How to stop moving until the woods forgot I was there. How to hear the difference between bird chatter and a warning call. How to notice when the wind changes its voice. I tried to teach back, which was silly maybe. I showed it pictures in a book and played music on a radio Ruth found at a yard sale. It liked the slow songs. It hummed. The sound was deeper than any music I'd had in my house. It made my chest feel warm and hollow at the same time. I kept the secret, not because I wanted to be special, because of hunters. Because of the way people get when they're curious and rude at once. Because once you say a thing out loud to the wrong ear, it's not yours anymore. I told Ruth only that the woods were busy. I told Daniel only that I felt watched in a way that didn't make me afraid. He stared at me a long second and then nodded, like he decided to believe me even if he didn't. Summer was simple. We met by the creek in the cool. Sometimes it would bring stones, smooth ones with lines, and lay them in a little stack, and I'd know I was supposed to notice the stack and not the stones. Once it brought a feather blue as a cold flame and set it on the porch like a kid showing a parent a field day ribbon. I tried not to make anything into a ceremony. That felt important. Leave things simple. Thank you. Good night. There was one day with men and guns again, and I don't like remembering it, but I will. It was August, hot enough to make pine sap run. I was inside sewing when a truck door slammed and then another. 2 men. Not the same ones. New noise. They walked like they owned the ground. They weren't looking for deer. I could tell by the way their eyes were up in the branches, not down. One of them pointed at my porch like he'd come here to ask for permission he had no interest in getting. I stepped outside with the squirt bottle I keep for the cats like that was a weapon, which tells you how much living alone makes you a little crazy. I said, "Can I help you?" The older one said they were following up on reports. I said, "What kind of reports?" He said, "Strange animals," and smiled without his eyes. My hands went cold. I told him I had raccoons like everybody else, and bears sometimes, and I bang pots at them, and that's the whole story. He tried to look past me through the door. I stepped so he couldn't. After a breath too long, they left. They didn't turn their heads at the tree line. That told me they weren't the kind of men who live by woods rules. I stood there watching dust behind their tires. When they were truly gone, the big one came out of shadow like shadow melting and stood in the open and looked me over for any harm and said, "Lo, thank you." I had to lean on the rail because my knees weren't where I left them. If you're waiting for some final proof, a photograph, a footprint cast, a government file, you'll be disappointed. I have none. I had opportunities. Daniel offered trail cams. I said no. He asked 3 times, then he let it go. He trusts me. That's a rare thing. He trusts that if I say a line shouldn't be crossed, it shouldn't. He started coming by more, not to pry, just to be around. He'd sit on the steps at dusk and say nothing. He'd bring groceries and refuse money and fix small things without telling me. He'd hug me long like a son who missed a mother, and I would go into my kitchen after and breathe into a dish towel until my chest stopped shaking. Ruth, for her part, added the little internet shop to her list and made me a sign with my name on it and a painted loon. She's the reason I keep my days in order. Sunday baking, Tuesday laundering, Thursday porch sweep. We need good friends more than we need anything else. That might be what this whole story is about. I'm not clever enough to say, fall again. The year rolled over like it was made to. The leaves started to go and the nights got that early dark. I felt tired in my bones in a way that didn't feel like sleep would fix it. I told myself it was the weather shift. I told myself a lot of things I didn't fully believe. I started breathing hard on the hill by the creek. I started dropping pins when I sewed because my fingers didn't want to hold small stuff the way they used to. I wrote things down I never used to write down. I put my wedding ring on a nail by the bed so I could find it when my hand swelled. The visiting didn't stop. If anything, it changed. The big one came closer to the house. Not onto the porch without me being there first. There were rules, I could feel them, but near. I would wake at night from the kind of doze you fall into and see a shadow at the edge of the yard sitting. Just sitting, the way you sit with someone in a hospital room when there isn't anything to fix. The little one grew. That's a funny sentence to write, like I expected it wouldn't. It got taller and leaner and bolder. It would edge up to the first step when the big one wasn't looking, and then run back when the big one huffed a warning. Kids are kids. I put a little wooden spool on the step one day. The next morning it was on the rail over the left post. 2 days later, on the right. When I left 2, they were stacked smallest over biggest. I smiled at that for an hour, I think. I kept meaning to tell my sons that I was okay, that I wasn't alone, not alone in the way they thought. Every time I tried to write it, the words broke apart. How do you say to people who think you're fragile that you are strong because you spend your evenings humming with something that shouldn't be possible? I wrote them about quilts and the weather. I asked about the grandkids. I said I loved them very much, and I meant it. I never told them about the steps on the porch at 2 a.m. The night I knew I had to leave the rest of my life behind, it was cold and clear. Stars like someone shook salt over the black. I walked out with my cane and my blanket and sat on the top step. The air made my nose sting. I could hear the creak under the skim ice. I said out loud, I can't tell anybody where I am. I can't. I'm happy. I'm safe. I'm with you. It sounded like talking to myself. It didn't feel like talking to myself. The big one came then, not from the spruce like usual, but from the darker place between the old maples. It came up slow and stopped at the foot of the steps. Close. I could see breath in the gap between its teeth when it opened its mouth a little to breathe. It sat down on the ground, which put it only a little lower than my top step. We didn't speak for a while. Then it said, "You, tired?" Not a question. I said, "Yes." It looked at the door and then at me. "Walk," it said. That scared me. And I don't mean the way a jump scares you. I mean the way real change scares you. I said, "Where?" It touched the porch board with its fingers, and then touched the ground, and then made a small motion with its head toward the dark, not dragging me, not pushing, inviting. I stood up and my knee didn't like it, and I let my hand rest on the top of its shoulder without thinking. The hair was coarse like a horse's winter coat, warm, solid under it like a wall. We went slow, down the 3 steps, across the yard, past the place where the grass ends and the moss starts, into the trees that have watched every mistake I've ever made and forgiven them without comment. The ground was uneven. It steadied me when I wobbled. We didn't go far, just far enough that the cabin looked like a rectangle with a little light at one side. There's a place where the spruce open and the ground lifts. From there you can see up through the branches to a piece of sky that feels closer than a roof. We stood there. We listened to our breath. We listened to something small moving under brush and a barred owl farther off making its question. After a while, it said in that careful voice, "Not end, change." I nodded, and then I cried. The quiet kind where the water just runs and you don't make any sound. It put its hand on my shoulder the way it had that day with the hunters, the way my husband used to when I was angry over nothing. We stood that way until my knees said they had had enough. It walked me back and let me go at the steps like I was a friend who hadn't needed help after all. I wrote some things down after that, not because I thought anybody would believe me, because I wanted the world to have one more voice saying, there are still mysteries and they are good if you let them be good. I put the papers where I knew Daniel would find them if something happened. I tucked the note to Ruth in the bread drawer because that's where she always goes first. A week later, I had a bad day, the kind where standing takes a plan. I spent most of it in the chair by the window with a blanket over my lap, watching wind go one way across the grass and then the other. Toward evening, I asked out loud without moving my mouth much, "Are you there?" The shadow at the edge of the yard lifted and became itself. It came closer than it had ever come. It stepped onto the porch and sat beside my chair, not close enough to touch, close enough to feel a little warmer. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. The song it made, the low one, started in its chest and filled the room without being loud. The kind of sound that says, I am here and I won't go until you sleep. You want an ending. People always do. They want the police report, the cast of a footprint, the grainy photo. I have none of that. I have a quilt folded on my porch rail that I did not fold. I have a tin I left once that came back washed and upside down. I have a piece of twine that tied herbs I didn't grow into a bundle I didn't make. I have a word I hear in my dreams, in a voice that's half the woods and half something older. Friend, Ruth will tell you I got quieter, which she didn't think was possible. Daniel will tell you I smiled more, which he didn't think I had in me. My sons will tell you they tried, and I believe them. Everybody carries what they can. If you're listening to this and thinking I'm a lonely woman who made a friend out of the dark so I would have something to love, you might be right and also wrong. I did make a friend. I did love it. But I did not invent it. You can invent a person in your head. You can't invent fish on your step and footprints where nobody walked, and the feeling in your bones when something big breathes behind you and you are not afraid. Fear and safety are opposites. We're taught as kids. They aren't, not really. Sometimes fear is the edge of safety. Sometimes the safest thing is the one that makes your heart hammer because it's real. The last clear night before the snow came, I went out with my blanket and sat, and the stars were the kind you don't even get in stories because they'd be too much. I said, thank you for asking if I was hurt. I said, thank you for the herbs. I said, thank you for sitting with me when my hand shook. I said, I can't tell anybody where I am because I'm happy here. The big one came as quiet as a prayer you speak in your head and sat. The little one's eyes flashed once from the dark and then went out like two embers going to sleep. We watched the sky. The voice came once more, deep and low and kind in its own way. Forever, friend. I nodded and didn't trust my mouth. We sat until the cold got in through the blanket and into my bones, and I had to go in. At the door, I turned and looked out and lifted my hand. It lifted its hand too, just a little, and then rested it on the rail where my husband used to set his palm when he came home from the woods. I don't know what happens next for me. I don't know what happens next for anybody. I know that out there, a mother and her young crossed a patch of frozen ground and left no mark. I could prove to anybody who needed pictures. I know there's a spot by the creek where shelf mushrooms make a staircase on rotten birch, and if you stand there long enough, you can feel something like a heartbeat under your feet. I know there's a word that isn't quite a word at all, and it says more than I can when I try for whole paragraphs. Hurt, better, safe. Friend, I haven't slept the same since that first night. Not worse, just different. My ears stay on, if that makes sense. I listen for steps and breath and the little huff that means a kid is being scolded softly. When I sleep, I dream of spruce and the sound of water under ice and a warm weight of a hand on my shoulder that is too gentle for the size it belongs to. I'm not telling you to come looking. Don't. There's nothing here for you to capture. There is something here for you to respect. Leave room in your head for the kind of truth that doesn't need your flashlight. Sit quiet sometimes. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Pay attention when the birds go from chatter to warning and back again. Notice when the wind shifts. Put a blanket in a trunk for a guest you might never see. Say thank you with your hands. If anybody asks where I am, tell them I'm farther in than you'd walk in a day, not so far in that you can't still hear a truck on a good wind, and exactly far enough that a woman can make a life that doesn't need much explaining. Tell them I'm busy. I've got quilts to finish and herbs to hang and coffee to drink on a step that faces east. Tell them I am not lonely. Not anymore. And if, on a winter morning, you stand at the edge of your own yard and the snow holds sound like a bull and you think you hear a voice say one careful word, don't run. Don't shout. Put your hand on your chest so it knows where you are. Say the word back. Then go inside and put the kettle on. Some things don't need proof. They need care. They need quiet. They need you to keep a secret that isn't for you but passes through you and makes you steadier than you were before. This is me telling you what happened. That's all. I swear I have told it plain. I've left out what doesn't belong to me. I've put in what I can carry. If it sounds like a story, that's because it is one, and also because it isn't. It's a life that touched mine in a way that changed where I walk and how I breathe, and what I believe is possible before you get to the edge of a spruce stand at dusk. I can't tell you my exact location because I'm living happily with that creature. That's the sentence people stumble on. The truth under it is simple. I'm where I'm supposed to be. It's where it's supposed to be. We meet in the middle and say enough words to get by. The rest is understood.